Why was your worst date the worst? It was at a very Christian university where he lived in an all-boys dorm. He paraded me around to each room, just to prove he actually brought a girl home, and made a big show out of closing the door for privacy. Proceeded to make me sit on the floor the whole time, because the only seat in his room was his bed and he wasn't allowed to share a bed with a woman till marriage. Saw him again anyway. His 16-year-old ex showed up and started crying, and he told me he'd done crack a couple of times. He hit on multiple women each time I went to the restroom during our first, and only, date. Had 2 women sitting on his lap when I decided to ditch the loser and go home. He followed me home from the bar, had disclosed I lived not far, but did not provide an address because he was too drunk to go home. I told him to get a cab, but he refused, and the neighbors threatened to call the cops. Put him in the guest room in the basement to sleep it off, and went upstairs to my sister's room to sleep. He came in during the middle of the night buck naked asking if he could hop in with both of us. I took his clothes and threw them out the window and kicked him out while he screamed at me from the street about what a prude, heartless *tch I was. Went on an unprompted rant about feminism and women taking jobs away from men, then segued into some healthy conspiracy theories about Jews. I consider myself a feminist, was studying to be an engineer at the time. It's how we met actually, in the same class, and I'm Jewish. Oh man. I once went on a date with a guy from OkCupid years ago, and I thought the guy was okay, but slightly boring. And then he said, "I'm glad you're white. I would never date someone who wasn't white," as if it would be the most appalling thing in the world if they weren't. And I'm just sitting there, half Mexican, just very white passing, and I suddenly realize that maybe I might not be in safe company, so I just quietly eat the rest of my meal while he talks about himself and makes a few more questionable remarks about race, talking about where he grew up in Texas and how immigrants were stealing jobs when they couldn't even speak English, sort of madness. When it's finally time to leave, he says he had a great time and wanted to see me again, so I just nod and tell him I'll contact him, and I drive myself home. I took a second look at his profile. At the time OkCupid not only had a profile page, but a questionnaire page as well. I looked at his answers to some questions and found that I basically went on a date with a neo-Nazi. I made no contact after that. He begged for the date after I told him no, because his divorce wasn't final, and I didn't want to date someone in that stage. Against my better judgment, I told him I would meet him for coffee, but only so he could vent about his divorce stuff. Having been divorced 2 years prior, I empathized with his need to vent. He changed location immediately when I arrived, because his divorce wasn't final, and several of her friends were there. After telling me how he left the military because of discrimination he felt as a redhead, he told me I smelled intoxicating 7 times over the course of very painful conversation. When the date was over, he asked if I would come over to cuddle with him. When I emphatically replied that not only would I not, but that was a last date, and no, he could not have my phone number, he responded with, "So that's it? You're friend-zoning me," to which I laughed and said that would imply that we are friends. Then I drove around forever to make sure he couldn't follow me and figure out where I live. No more pity coffee dates. Back in college, my husband, then BF, and I were across the country, so we took a break and started dating other people. I got set up on a blind date with some dude who wouldn't shut up about how much of a feminist and a nice guy he is, on top of being creepy as hell. At the end, he grabbed the check before I even realized it was there and paid. I fully planned on paying for my half, then on the way out, asked if I was gonna spend the night with him. I said no, and he got belligerent and called me a whore. I led him on. I'm only in it for free food. I paid for dinner, so I deserve at least a hand job. I walked away and left after that hand job comment. The next day he texts me like he didn't just out himself as a horrible person. I just blocked his number and never saw him again. Met her on OkCupid. She claimed curvy and all her pictures only showed her head. We set up a date and I went to pick her up in my Mitsubishi Eclipse 2-door. She came out and was not curvy, but instead overweight like a sumo wrestler. Worst part, she could not fit in my car and she started to cry. That was the worst date thus far. Bragged about drug use. Bragged about not knowing his credit score or how much he had on his current credit card. Continually talked about how he wanted to beat everyone's ass. Kept on telling me that he was better than other guys because he knew how to respect women. Put down pretty much everyone and took zero responsibility himself. It was a long 2 hours. I should have left. He told me God had given him superpowers and that was why he had never been shot in all of his deployments. He also told me how he sometimes would travel abroad and take care of people he decided were likely involved in human trafficking. He asked why I wasn't religious right off the bat, then asked if I would go with him to one of those evangelical healing tents so I could watch God cure cancer. I think he has schizophrenia. He was genuinely terrifying. Went on a date with this girl that I met on Tinder. She looked curvy on the Tinder picture, so I said sure I will go on a date with her. When we met at the Starbucks, she was overweight and she was one of those feminazi. IDK how she managed to go on a date with me in the first place. I made the mistake to ask her about her job and she told me that for her job she sells vacuums. And for the 3 hours of the date, she kept explaining to me how her vacuum works and how good it is and that I should buy one. Yay, I had to text my friend to get me out of there by making an excuse. I was too nice not to just leave the first 10 minutes, stuck around for 3 hours. Tip: don't buy vacuums on your first date with someone.